In early July 1996, in Navokosnetsk, in the Abar River, terrible finds were found. Pots of children's bodies and skulls were removed from the water. Nearby, 2 days later, several more body fragments were found. The city has never known such a monstrous crime. From the remains, forensics determined that the dead were at least 6 girls and 3 boys aged 9 to 14. The operational investigation team began processing several versions. The first assumption was made by forensic experts, and they came to the unequivocal conclusion that such a thorough dismemberment of the bodies could not be done on the street. Children were killed and dismembered indoors and then thrown into the river. The experts also established that the dismemberment tool was a knife and a saw, and that the ripper acted quite professionally with them. But who could have committed these terrible atrocities? The investigation had yet to reveal. Literally 2 weeks later, after the terrible finds, 14-year-old Lena and 15-year-old Olga disappeared in the Abar River. Just in case, they checked local night discos, youth cafes, and bars, but the girls were nowhere to be found. Vladimir Semenov, deputy chief of police of the Navokosnetsk region, who led the search, having studied the possible routes of movement of the criminal, came to the conclusion that the maniac has a car. The traffic police department received an order to detain all suspicious car drivers with children inside. About 10 people were detained, all assured that they were engaged in private transportation, without making an exception for teenagers. All the detainees were released, having issued a fine for not having a license for private activity. Perhaps the missing girls could fall into the environment of drug addicts, and at the direction of the head of the Navokosnetsk police department, a large-scale operation was carried out in the city to identify brothels. During the inspection, apartments, basements, warehouses were checked, where drug addicts gathered. The detainees were shown photos of Lena and Olga, but no one saw the girls. Child abduction has become widespread. Since the beginning of the summer holidays, 43 teenagers have already gone missing, and if we assume the worst, then it is unlikely that one person could do it. Until now, nothing was known about the criminal, except that he professionally dismembered the dead. While the operatives were busy calculating the killer, he again reminded himself. In one of the city wastelands, the remains of 2 carefully dissected women were found. It was possible to identify the dead by the preserved heads. The operatives were struck by the fact that they were not children and teenagers, but adult women. Before that, the maniac ripper killed only children, which means that he has now switched to adults. During the massive inspections of stations, dens, markets, and attics, many missing children were found. All of them came from dysfunctional families. However, the fate of 8 girls and 5 boys was still unknown. All these children lived in the same area and went to the same school. They disappeared one day without returning from a walk. The only witness, an 11-year-old boy, saw them near the construction site. The detectives examined every meter of the construction site, every room, secluded places, interviewed the builders. They didn't find any children. In the meantime, 3 more underage girls disappeared, and the next day the severed head of one of them was found and identified. The detectives found out that 2 days before the terrible discovery in the wasteland, 3 girls, being treated in the hospital, went for a walk without telling any of the adults about it. After plastic reconstruction of the skin, the head was shown to the parents of the missing girls. One of the mothers was horrified to recognize the facial features of her daughter Anastasia. The operatives checked all possible places where the girls could go for their last walk. They were also instructed to check all the nearby grocery stores, and in one of them, the saleswoman recognized the girls from the photographs. In the store, they had a lively conversation and bought a bottle of water from her. She also remembered that an elderly woman approached the girls and asked them for something, after which they left in an unknown direction. Based on the descriptions of the store clerk, an identikit of the woman who took the girls away was compiled. The identikit of the woman was distributed to all the district police officers, and one of them noticed a slight resemblance to a certain Lyudmila Spasivtseva. She was filled with the fact that she was constantly in conflict with her neighbors. She worked nearby as a caretaker in a kindergarten. It turned out that she has a son, Alexander, who is currently undergoing treatment in a psychiatric hospital in the city of Oriol. Alexander Spasivtsev was born on March 1, 1970 in the city of Novokuznetsk, where he lived in a house with his mother Lyudmila, father Nikolai, and older sister Nadezhda. My father drank heavily and cheated on my mother, but she broke up with him only after 15 years, without formally filing a divorce. Alexander Spasivtsev was born with a weight deficit and then was often sick. Until the age of 12, he slept in his mother's bed. He could be called a hooligan child, but his mother always protected him. Alexander's mother got a job as a lawyer's assistant in court. She loved to bring home photographs of corpses from criminal cases and looked at them for a long time with her son. Criminal cases replaced books for Alexander. This process made the teenager experience strange sensations that caused nervous breakdowns and the first hit in a psychiatric hospital. In 1991, Alexander met a girl named Evgenia. They walked together. Alexander read poetry to her, but once he beat her, and she decided to break off relations with him. Then he locked the girl in his apartment and brutally tortured her for a month. According to the official version, she died of sepsis. Her entire body was covered with purulent abscesses, because of which the doctors, most likely, did not establish the true cause of death. Alexander was detained, but he claimed that he did not scoff at all, but devotedly looked after his beloved, who was sick and refused to eat herself. The young man was declared insane. With a diagnosis of schizophrenia, he was sent to the Oriol Psychiatric Clinic, where he spent 3 years. In 1995, doctors noted remission and discharged the patient from the hospital. At the same time, according to the documents, Alexander allegedly remained in the hospital. No marks were made about the discharge. Such a small bureaucratic mistake cost at least 20 lives. Alexander returned to his homeland and opened the hunt for the inhabitants of Novokuznetsk. His first victim, after being discharged from a psychiatric hospital, was a little girl named Lyudmila. Spasivtsev, trying to hide the traces of the crime, dismembered her corpse, and his mother buried the remains in a wasteland. A month later, he saw children playing near the construction site, approached them, and offered them a cigarette. And then he suggested that the children rob his apartment. They approached his apartment. Alexander opened the door with his key, invited them to go into his bedroom. Then the children became agitated and suspected that something was wrong, and one of the boys began to scream. Then Alexander stabbed each of them in the chest with a knife. He put the children in one place, covered them with a rag, and in this state they lay for 4 days. Then he dragged the children into the corridor, and a week later Alexander's mother came to get rid of the corpses of the children. While Alexander's mother dealt with the corpses, Alexander himself went to sleep. Victims of different sex and age were lured into the maniac's apartment under various pretexts. And not only he himself did this, but also his mother. After rapes, beatings, and murders, the maniac dismembered the corpses, and the mother, who became an accomplice, helped to bury the remains behind the house in a wasteland in the Abar River. With each murder, Spasivtsev's mental disorder progressed. The offender not only engaged in cannibalism himself, but also forced his victims to do it. On September 24, 1996, Alexander's mother lured the last 3 victims of the maniac into her son's apartment herself, under the pretext of helping to open the door. Alexander immediately killed 13-year-old Nastya, who tried to hit him to save herself. To some extent, she was even lucky. She died instantly, and she did not have to experience what her 2 friends had to experience. He kept 2 of Nastya's friends handcuffed for about a month, mocked him in every possible way, tortured them, raped them, forced them to cut open the body of a friend and eat her remains. He then brutally murdered 13-year-old Genya and forced the last victim, 15-year-old Olga, to dismember the body and eat the girl's meat soup with him. The bones of Nastya and Genya were gnawed by Alexander's dog before her eyes. And although all these horrors took place in an apartment building, the neighbors, who heard screams and groans, thought that the unbalanced tenant made the sounds. A neighbor of the Spasivtsevs reported to the police about a putrid smell from the apartment, but the law enforcement agencies did not respond to the signal. As a result, the cannibal went unpunished for months and committed a huge number of crimes. Alexander was caught by accident during a planned detour for the purpose of prevention before the winter heating period. A team of plumbers knocked on the maniac's apartment. He refused to let them in, arguing that he was locked up because he had a mental disorder. Plumbers called a district police officer, who broke the door. In the bath, investigators found the torso of a girl without arms and legs, and a severed head and chest were removed from the tank. Olga was found alive, handcuffed to a radiator. Spasivtsev himself managed to escape on the roof of the house, but 2 days later he was arrested at his own entrance. After being released from captivity, 15-year-old Olga, taken hostage by a maniac, managed to give detailed testimony against him.
Оля, скажи, пожалуйста, кто привел вас в квартиру?
Бабушка.
Бабушка? При каких обстоятельствах? Как она вас привела? Дверь не может открыть? Она не может, да? И поэтому позвала вас, чтобы помогли.
During interrogation, Spasivtsev confessed to 19 murders, exactly as many people as the investigation managed to establish at that time were killed in his apartment. At the same time, jewelry and 82 sets of used clothes were found during the search. The identity of many victims remained unknown. Later, citing a damaged mind, the maniac retracted his own words. However, the court found him sane and in 1997 sentenced him to 10 years in prison for the murder of 3 girls. Already next year, a new trial began. Investigators collected evidence for another 15 murders. The opinion of doctors from the research center changed the preventive measure and sent Alexander to a hospital near Volgograd. The offender's mother was also prosecuted for her complicity in 3 murders and received 13 years in prison. Since the cannibal and murderer Spasivtsev was declared insane and sent for compulsory treatment, he has been in a special psychiatric hospital in the Volgograd region. The maniac received a disability of the 2nd group and a pension, part of which he sends to his mother. Lyudmila left the colony in 2009. In 2022, she turned 82. The woman still does not lose hope that Alexander will someday be released and the family will be reunited. 15-year-old Olga, after testifying against Spetsivtsev, died the next day.